Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Before meeting Farrah, Ellis never thought she would settle in Montreal. As an acoustic engineer, he had planned to leave his professional mark by traveling between famous theaters and concert halls around the world. However, that jazz festival 6 years ago changed everything. At the time, Ellis was commissioning a sound system for the festival's outdoor stage. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaf gaps of the maple trees, casting dappled light and shadows on the stage. At the very moment he was focused on adjusting the equalizer, a voice came from behind. "Can you make the saxophone sound more prominent?" Ellis turned to see a woman in a blue dress with an exhibit book in her hand. The sunlight outlined her elegant silhouette, and her smile made him momentarily forget the work at hand. "You're a musician?" Ellis asked. "No, an art show curator," she replied. "Just an amateur music lover. My name is Farrah Lowell." Ellis Reed. He introduced himself, acoustical engineer and professional music lover. They spent the entire weekend together at the festival talking about music, art, and the soul of the city. A year later, they exchanged wedding rings to jazz music. Now Ellis dragged his tired body home from the studio, and as the key was inserted into the lock hole, he noticed that the porch light was dimly lit, adding a touch of mystery to the Montreal streets at night. Acoustic tests in the studio went on late into the night, but he didn't mind. Over the years, he has become accustomed to long hours immersed in audio analysis and testing, and the process of finding the perfect acoustics gives him a sense of satisfaction. Pushing the door open, the house was dark. Ellis sighed softly. Farrah was probably out at some art event again. Since she'd taken on the role of curator at that gallery, there had been a noticeable increase in socializing in the evenings. He turned on the light in the foyer and found a note on the dining room table. "There's an impromptu exhibition preparation meeting. Dinner's in the fridge. Love you. F." Ellis smiled as she gathered up the note and put it in a drawer. It was their habit to save every note the other left. Their 5 years of marriage have allowed them to develop a silent set of bonds that they can feel even when they are not around each other. He opened the refrigerator and Farrah had prepared a steak and salad for him, along with a small bottle of the red wine they had fallen in love with on their trip to Italy. After dinner, Ellis sat in an armchair in the living room and looked up at the ceiling. Tomorrow is an important project presentation and he needs to check the data again. However, the ringing of his cell phone interrupted his thoughts. "Caller ID," says Farrah. "Hey, still in the meeting?" Ellis asked. There was loud background music and joking on the other end of the line, obviously not in the conference room. Farrah's voice sounded a little nervous. The meeting was over and the team decided to go to the bar to relax. "Probably be home in another 2 hours. Don't wait for me." "Okay, be safe." Ellis finished and hung up. Such calls have become more frequent lately. It's not that Ellis doesn't trust Farrah, but he's noticed small changes. She's starting to pay more attention to her appearance, changing her perfume frequently, coming home later and later, and sometimes even taking mysterious phone calls and walking out onto the balcony to talk softly. Ellis shook her head, putting those thoughts behind her. Perhaps it's just a case of paranoia brought on by the stress of the job. Farrah has always been a social person, and the art world is inherently active. He opened his laptop and continued to refine his presentation for tomorrow. Without realizing it, the clock pointed to midnight. Ellis heard the door lock turn as Farrah gingerly entered the living room. Still awake, she was slightly surprised to see Ellis sitting at her computer. Final changes before project presentation. Ellis closed his computer and gazed at his wife. Moonlight poured through the window, tracing the graceful contours of her face. After 5 years, he still gets distracted by her beauty every time he sees her. Farrah came over to him and dropped a light kiss on his forehead. "I'm sorry I've been so busy lately. We should plan a short trip when the new exhibit opens." Ellis smiled and nodded. "I'm looking forward to it. It's time to go to bed now. We all have early meetings tomorrow." Late at night, Ellis lay in bed, listening to Farrah's even breathing. He should have slept peacefully on such a calm night, but he always felt that there was something wrong in his heart. On weekend mornings, sunlight pours into the apartment through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Ellis sits on the terrace enjoying coffee and the newspaper. Farrah walks out in her robe, rubbing her sleepy eyes, cell phone in hand. "The list of artists for the new show is finalized," she says excitedly. "And you won't believe who's back in Montreal. Vance Harlow. He agreed to have a solo show at our gallery." Ellis put down the paper and looked over at his wife. "Vance?" That college-age Vance. Farrah nodded, a twinkle in her eye. He's a hot installation artist right now. Last year's exhibitions in Paris and New York caused a sensation, and it was a big break to have him. Ellis knows how much Vance means to Farrah. In college, they were a model couple in the art school before breaking up due to artistic philosophical disagreements. Farrah rarely spoke of the affair, but Ellis knew it had affected her deeply. That's great, Ellis said sincerely. When do we meet to discuss the details of the exhibit? Next Tuesday, Farrah replied. Do you want to come along? I think you'll like his work. His sound installations are very creative. Ellis shook her head. I have a client meeting on Tuesday, so you guys talk. But I'll be there the day the gallery opens. Over the next few days, Farrah became visibly excited. She spends more time in the office, and when she gets home, she is constantly working at her computer to prepare for the exhibition. Ellis respected her work ethic and volunteered to take on more chores to make sure she was rested when she got home. However, as Vance's exhibition approaches, Ellis begins to notice something unusual. Farrah's cell phone was always set to silent and never left her side. She would bring it into the bathroom before showering, and on a few occasions, she quickly ended a call or switched screens when Ellis walked into the room. Ellis came home early on Friday night, intending to surprise Farrah. He bought her favorite desserts and flowers, trying to create a romantic evening for his wife, who had been working hard lately. Pushing open the door of the house is quiet. Farrah should not be back yet. Ellis put the dessert in the refrigerator, the flower arrangements, and then went to the bedroom to change. Just then, he heard the sound of water coming from the bathroom. It turns out Farrah has gone home. He walks toward the bathroom, ready to knock on the door in greeting, when he hears Farrah's voice whispering. It's not cheating, it's just a game. Farrah's voice came through the doorway. I'm going to prove that I can betray without being found out. Today, my husband was upstairs taking a nap when my ex was right under his nose. We do this every day. Ellis froze in place, her blood seeming to freeze. He couldn't believe his ears. It was Farrah's voice, unmistakable, but the content was like a sharp knife in his heart. In an instant, all the anomalies of the past few months flashed back in his mind like a movie. The secret late-night phone calls, the inexplicable meetings on the calendar, the unusual protection she'd been giving to her cell phone lately, and the new additions to her closet that she rarely wore in front of him. All the signs pointed to a fact that he did not want to recognize, and now it was laid bare before him. The game. She called it a game. The word echoed in Ellis' mind with sarcasm and contempt. 5 years of marriage could be so cheap in her eyes that it could be a game to prove her ability to cheat. He thought about how Farrah had once told him, "You're the most stable pillar in my life," which now sounded like a cruel joke. He took a few silent steps back and returned to the living room. Sitting on the couch, his mind blank. A wave of nausea rushed up his throat, and he took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He needed to think, he needed to plan, but at the moment, his emotions swept over reason like a tsunami. A few minutes later, he heard the bathroom door open and Farrah stepped out, a calm smile on her face. She was dressed in loungewear, her hair pulled back casually, and she looked so familiar and yet so incredibly unfamiliar. "Ellis, you're back," she said in surprise, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "I thought you were working late tonight." Ellis watched her, looking for any sign of guilt or unease. But her expression hid everything almost perfectly, with only the slight fluttering of her eyelashes giving away her nervousness. This masterful disguise reinforced his conviction that this was not the first time and would not be the last. Ellis forced herself to calm down and act as if nothing had happened. "Finished work early and wanted to surprise you." He pointed to the kitchen. "There's your favorite tiramisu in the fridge." Farrah came over and kissed him on the cheek. "You're so sweet. I'm going to go change, and then we'll enjoy dessert together." Ellis nodded and watched her walk toward the bedroom. He felt a wave of nausea as the conversation he had just had replayed in his mind. Game? Do this every day? He couldn't understand Farrah's words, much less accept the reality. At dinner, Ellis did her best to act normal, but every second was torture. He gazed across the room at Farrah, the woman with whom he'd shared 5 years of marriage, suddenly so unfamiliar. She talks about the work of the gallery, the planning of new exhibitions, in a light tone, as if it were business as usual. "Vance's setup requires special acoustics," Farrah said. Maybe you can give some professional advice?" Ellis nodded mechanically. "Sure, let me know anytime you need me." That night, Ellis lies in bed, pretending to be asleep, but in reality, every nerve is taut. He listened as Farrah's breathing gradually became steadier and thought about what to do next. Direct questioning? Gathering more evidence? Pretending not to know? Each option pained him. At dawn, Ellis made his decision. He needed hard evidence, and he needed to know how far the game had gone. He'll stay calm and keep Farrah out of the loop for now while he starts his own investigation. Over the next few days, Ellis began secretly recording Farrah's trips and calls. He noticed several suspicious patterns. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Farrah claimed to be working late at the gallery when her car was not actually in the gallery parking lot. She often made excuses to go out after receiving a phone call from a specific number. And on several occasions, when Ellis came home early, he noticed the slight odor of cologne in the house, which wasn't the brand he used. On Tuesday afternoon, Ellis decided to take action. He lied about a client meeting and actually followed Farrah in his car. She didn't go home after leaving the gallery, but drove to a modern apartment building on the other side of town. Ellis watched her from a distance as she walked into the building, then dialed the property management office. Utilizing his connections from having done acoustical design for the building, he was able to obtain visitor records without any problems. Sure enough, Farrah visits the building's 15th floor Vance Harlow's apartment almost every week at a set time. The evidence was becoming clearer, but Ellis needed more conclusive confirmation. The next day, he pretended to be on a business trip, but actually installed several hidden cameras and recording devices at his home. The devices connect to his cell phone, allowing him to monitor his home remotely. Just 2 days later, his hunch was confirmed. Farrah came home early Thursday afternoon, and Vance arrived at their apartment shortly afterward. Through a hidden camera, Ellis witnesses footage of his wife and her ex getting intimate in their home. He turned off the video, unable to continue watching, and felt an intense wave of nausea. That night, when Farrah returned home as if nothing had happened and asked about his business trip, Ellis felt a sense of anger and betrayal that he had never felt before. She brought takeout from his favorite Italian restaurant, asked if his trip was going well, and even offered to go see a newly released movie together over the weekend. The normalcy and coziness of it all was in brutal contrast to the betrayal he had just witnessed. "How was your day?" Ellis asked, his voice so calm that he surprised even himself. Farrah serves the pasta on a plate and replies without looking up, "Busy, but it's going well. Vance's exhibit needs some special acoustics, and I told him you might be able to give some advice when you get back." She looked up and smiled. "He's interested in your expertise." Ellis gripped the fork until the metal edge was almost embedded in his palm. Did Vance's interest in his expertise extend to using his wife? They were so bold as to be in his home, in the bed they shared. A wave of nausea struck again at the thought. "That's really interesting." He tried to keep his tone steady. "I'm curious about his artistic philosophy." Farrah spoke enthusiastically about Vance's art, describing how he fuses sound with visual elements to create groundbreaking experiences. As she spoke, Ellis noticed a peculiar gleam in her eyes, an undisguised admiration and fascination for Vance, the way she had looked at him when they first met. That look that had once made him feel like the most special person in the world was now given to another man. "You guys seem to work well together," Ellis commented, "and collaborate very close." "Art requires close collaboration," Farrah explains, with a hint of defensiveness in her voice that Ellis can recognize, especially with an artist as experimental as Vance. Ellis nodded and put a piece of bread in his mouth, chewing mechanically. His brain had begun to analyze the situation with a cold logic. They were playing this game right under his nose, enjoying the thrill of deception. This was not just cheating, it was total contempt for their marriage and a complete trampling of his dignity as a husband and a human being. After dinner, Farrah suggests watching a movie together. This is what they used to do: snuggle up on the couch and share a bowl of popcorn. Tonight, this once cozy habit turned into a painful performance. Ellis sits at one end of the couch, deliberately distancing herself from Farrah, claiming work fatigue requires space. The movie showed, but he didn't take in a single frame. His thoughts drifted to the possibility of vengeance, not impulsive violence, but carefully planned revelations. As an acoustic engineer, He has the technical know-how to design a perfect surveillance system. As a betrayed husband, he has enough motivation to bring the truth to light. That night, Ellis lay in bed, listening to the steady breathing of Farrah beside him, the anger in his heart having transformed into a calm resolve. Not only does he want to know the truth, he wants to make the betrayer pay. If Farrah and Vance want to play the game, then he's going to change the rules of the game and make them face an ending they could never have anticipated. Over the weekend, Ellis lies about needing to go back to the studio to pick up materials and actually begins to plot his revenge. He drove downtown to the electronics store with a clear vision in mind. "Need a hand?" the clerk inquired. Ellis nodded. "I need to put together a high-definition audio and video surveillance system for an acoustic lab project." He inquired in detail about the specifications and functions of the various equipment and eventually chose several high-quality miniature cameras, directional microphones, and an outdoor weatherproof LCD monitor. The clerk may have noticed his unusually conscientious demeanor, but Ellis's professional background made it all seem reasonable and non-suspicious. "These cameras can transmit live footage over Wi-Fi," the clerk explains, "and the resolution is high enough to capture a clear picture even in low light." Ellis nodded in satisfaction. "Perfect. I need to record and compare audio-video changes in different acoustic environments." After leaving the electronics store, he headed to a coffee shop and contacted Noah, a friend he had met in college years ago and was now a cybersecurity expert. Noah was curious about Ellis' sudden desire to learn live streaming techniques, but didn't ask much. "Basically, you need an RTMP server to handle the video stream," Noah explains, "and then set up a system that can distribute to multiple platforms simultaneously. It's not particularly complicated, but it requires some technical foundation." Ellis took careful notes. "What do I need if I want to create an anonymous live link and send it to both a designated email list and social media account?" Noah casts a quizzical look. "That doesn't sound like a normal acoustic experiment." "An art installation," Ellis quickly explains, "an interactive project for Farrah's gallery. Audiences can participate in the art experience in real time through the link." At the mention of art installations, Noah nods his head in understanding. Projects in the art world often go beyond conventional thinking. He explains in detail how to set up a secure anonymous live streaming system, how to script for simultaneous sending, and even provides links to some open source tools. "The most important thing is to make sure your servers are stable enough," Noah concludes with a reminder. "If there are a large number of viewers connecting at the same time, you'll need enough bandwidth." After leaving the cafe, Ellis went back to a nondescript computer retailer and purchased a high-performance laptop and a couple of portable hard drives for cash. He didn't want to leave any traces on his usual devices. Back at the studio, Ellis began assembling and testing the device. As an acoustic engineer, he has an almost paranoid quest for precision. He tested camera positions at different angles and adjusted microphone sensitivity to ensure that even the slightest sound was clearly captured. He designed a system that could be controlled remotely, enabling him to start an entire network from anywhere with his cell phone. In the evening, he researched Montreal's privacy laws and regulations related to video surveillance. Canadian law does allow homeowners to install surveillance equipment on their premises, especially for security reasons. He even consulted a lawyer friend, cautiously asking questions based on hypothetical situations. Theoretically, what are the legal consequences if someone films evidence of misconduct in their own home and then publicizes that evidence? Ellis asked. "It depends on a variety of factors," the attorney replied. "The content of the recording, the manner in which it is made public, the extent of the other party's informed consent, etc. It is usually legal to record in one's own home, but publicizing this content may involve issues such as privacy laws and defamation of reputation. What if the recording shows criminal or moral misconduct?" The lawyer pondered for a moment. The court might be more understanding if it was for evidence gathering, especially for divorce proceedings. However, public dissemination may still pose legal risks. "I would advise anyone in this situation to consult a legal professional first." Ellis nodded her thanks, her mind made up. He's willing to take the possible legal consequences if it means Farrah and Vance pay the price for their game. The plan begins to take shape. When Farrah and Vance rendezvous in their home again, he will initiate a live stream that will not only play on a monitor outside their home, but will also be sent to Farrah's coworkers, friends, and family. This is not only to expose the truth, but also to let the participants in this game experience the real social consequences. Ellis picked the moment, the day before the opening of the Vance solo show curated by Farrah. According to him, Farrah will invite Vance to his home to celebrate on this day, and all the gallery's staff and the art world will receive a link to the live broadcast. With the equipment in place and the plan finalized, Ellis felt a calm determination. He is no longer the husband who is kept in the dark, but the enforcer who is about to reveal the truth. As he checked the angle of the last camera, his cell phone vibrated, a message from Farrah. "I'll be home late with final preparations before Vance's show tomorrow. Love you." Ellis stared at the "love you" and felt a tingle. Where once those two words had brought him warmth and security, now they were nothing but emptiness and irony. He replied, "Good luck with everything. I'll be home waiting for you." The next morning, Farrah hurries out the door to the gallery, not having the slightest idea of the fate that awaits her. Ellis begins the final preparations, checking every piece of equipment to make sure the live system is working properly. He compiled a mailing list of gallery staff, important figures in the art world, and their mutual friends and family. He even hacked into the gallery's digital display screen system to ensure that live content could be shown in preparation for the exhibition. At 3 p.m., Ellis receives an alert on his cell phone. The home's motion sensors have been triggered. He opens the surveillance app and sees Farrah arrive home early and begin to organize her room, lighting scented candles and changing into a new dress. Shortly afterward, the doorbell rings and Vance appears in the doorway, holding a bottle of champagne and flowers. Ellis took a deep breath and hovered her finger over the live button. He knew that once pressed, all 3 lives would be changed forever. After a moment's hesitation, he firmly pressed the button and turned on the live stream. At the same time, he activated the monitors outside his home and then turned to the program that hacked into the gallery's digital display system. 3 weeks ago, he gained access to the gallery network on the pretext of assisting with Vance's sound installation. At the time, Farrah was ecstatic that he was finally starting to accept and support her professional work with Vance. Ironically, it was this support that paved the way for his plan of revenge. He typed in the last line of code, hit enter, and sent the live feed simultaneously to the monitors downstairs in the apartment, to the digital screens in the gallery, and to a carefully compiled email list Farrah's coworkers, her clients, important people in the art world, and even her family. Ellis drove back to her apartment, her heart racing but unusually calm. He knew that once he took this step, there was no turning back. It was not only a punishment for Farrah and Vance, but also a sort of release for himself, a way to externalize his inner pain into action. When he arrived at the bottom of the apartment building, there were already several neighbors standing outside, confused and shocked, looking at the monitors that played the private images. Someone recognized him and opened his mouth to speak, but was stopped by his icy stare. Ellis ignores the whispers around him and strides toward the elevator. The elevator ascent felt unusually long. Ellis stared at the digital display, watching the floor numbers slowly change. 5, 6, 7. His cell phone began to vibrate as message after message poured in. First Farrah's friends, full of confusion and shock. Then the gallery staff, whose tone quickly shifted from inquisitive to horrified. And finally Farrah herself, with multiple consecutive text messages ranging from "What is this?" to "Ellis, are you crazy?" and then "Please stop." He put his cell phone on silent and continued to wait. 10, 11, 12. The screen of his cell phone kept lighting up, displaying various social media notifications. The live link was spreading at an alarming rate, far beyond his expectations. In the tight-knit community of the art world, a scandal involving a well-known curator and an emerging artist is enough to set the internet ablaze. As the elevator doors opened on the 14th floor, Ellis's phone vibrated again. It was an incoming call from the gallery director. He knows that the same image is playing on the monitors at the gallery's preparatory site, where Farrah's colleagues and members of the art world are witnessing her betrayal. The call automatically went to voicemail, and he could imagine the angry and shocked tone on the other end. The few short steps toward her apartment felt like Ellis had traveled through a world. He thinks back to the first time he brought Farrah home 5 years ago, when the two of them were filled with longing and thought love could conquer all. Now he stands before the same door, ready to destroy the last vestiges of that love with his own hands. Outside the door, he could hear hurried footsteps and low arguments coming from inside. They already know. Taking a deep breath, Ellis calmly inserted the key, turned the lock, and pushed the door open. The moment the door opened, time seemed to freeze. In the living room, Farrah and Vance are clinging to each other when they suddenly hear a noise and turn their heads to the door. Farrah's eyes dilated with horror, and the blood drained from them in an instant. Vance, on the other hand, looks as if he's been immobilized, the glass in his hand slipping and shattering on the floor. "Ellis," Farrah called out softly, her voice trembling. Ellis stood in the doorway, watching the scene with an expressionless face. He slowly raised his cell phone, the screen showing the live stream in progress and the growing number of viewers. "Game over," he said calmly. Farrah frowned in confusion, not yet understanding what was happening. Just then, her cell phone began to vibrate like crazy as message after message and call after call poured in. She picked up her cell phone and saw countless messages from coworkers, friends, and family, some expressing shock, others filled with anger and disappointment. "What did you do?" Farrah looked at Ellis in horror, her voice almost a scream. "Just making your game public," Ellis replied, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You said it was a game to prove that you could betray without being found out. Now, let's see what happens when you get caught." Vance snapped back to his senses at that point, quickly straightening his clothes and trying to stay calm. "Look, Ellis, it's not what you think, dash." "Shut up," Ellis interrupted, her eyes icy. "I heard everything. It's not cheating. It's just a game, right? It's under my nose and I do it every day." He repeated word for word what Farrah had said on the phone. Farrah's face paled even more as she realized Ellis knew a lot more than she thought. "Ellis, please, turn off the feed so we can talk," she pleaded. "Talk," Ellis sneered. "What's there to talk about after you treat our marriage like a game board?" He went to the window and pulled back the curtains, pointing downstairs to the gathered neighbors and outdoor displays. "Look at your audience, Farrah. They're all enjoying your show." Farrah rushed to the window and nearly fell over as her legs gave way at the sight of the downstairs. Her cell phone rang again, this time from the gallery director. She answered it shakily, and an angry growl came through the receiver. It turned out that all the digital screens at the exhibition site were broadcasting live content, which was witnessed by the staff who came to set up before the opening and several collectors who arrived early. "You've ruined me." Farrah hangs up and screams hysterically. "Do you realize what this means? My career is over." Ellis nodded. "Just as you ruined our marriage." "Fair exchange, no?" Vance tries to leave quietly, but Ellis stops him. "Not so fast, Mr. Artist. You haven't quite finished showing your work." He pointed to his cell phone. "The link to the live stream has been sent to all those interested in your upcoming exhibit. I'm sure they have a new understanding of your art now." Vance's face turned pale as well. His solo show was crucial to his career, and now it could be ruined by this scandal. "You don't understand the consequences of this," he threatened. "I'll sue you for invasion of privacy." "Be my guest," Ellis sneered. "I'm sure the judge will be interested in the games you play in the home of a legally married couple." In addition, Canadian law allows homeowners to install security cameras in their residences. "I just happened to share the image with someone who cared." Farrah sat paralyzed on the couch, tears blurring her vision. Her cell phone kept vibrating as a tidal wave of comments and messages came in on social media. Her reputation in the art world was completely destroyed, and the professional image she had built up over the years collapsed in a matter of minutes. "Turn it off, please," she choked out a plea. "It's enough already." Ellis looked at the woman he once loved and felt a void. The thrill of revenge was short-lived, followed by deep sadness and loss. He shut down the broadcast, but knew the damage was done and could not be undone. "I'll be staying at the hotel," Ellis said calmly. "And tomorrow I'll be contacting a lawyer about the divorce. I hope your game is worth losing everything." He turned to leave, when Vance suddenly rushed forward and grabbed him by the shoulders. "You think that's the end of it? You've ruined us, and I'm going to make you pay for it." Ellis looked at him calmly. "You've taken the most important thing I have. Now, we're all empty-handed." Walking out of the apartment building, Ellis felt a wave of vertigo. The thrill of revenge was fading, leaving only emptiness and exhaustion. He drove to the nearest hotel, checked in, and then sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the dark TV screen, thinking. The next few weeks were like a long nightmare. Within the first 48 hours of the incident, the video went viral on social media, despite attempts by platform administrators to remove the content. Video clips, screenshots, and various comments flooded Farrah and Vance's social media pages. Art magazines and local news reported the art world scandal in a subtle way, avoiding any direct reference to the video, but letting those in the know what was going on. Ellis's behavior has sparked heated controversy on both legal and ethical levels. One night, he overheard his case being discussed on a talk show on the hotel lobby TV. While it may not technically be illegal to record the contents of one's own home, the public sharing of such private content is clearly an act of vindictiveness, commented one legal expert, which goes beyond the collection of evidence into the realm of public shaming. Another guest took a different view, but we cannot ignore the seriousness of the betrayal. Traditionally, society has not condemned marital infidelity enough, allowing betrayers to escape the social consequences they deserve. The debate extended to the web, with Twitter and Reddit buzzing with the hashtags #GameOver and #MontrealAffair. Ellis finds himself becoming a symbolic figure, representing a new paradigm of betrayal and revenge in the digital age. Some see him as a hero for his bravery in exposing the truth, while many more see his behavior as too extreme and a public desecration of a private relationship. At the center of this storm, divorce proceedings started quickly. Ellis hired an experienced family law attorney and submitted proof of infidelity, including video evidence. Legally, this evidence puts him in a favorable position in the property division and settlement agreement. Montreal courts are usually more sympathetic to the betrayed party where there is clear evidence of infidelity, his lawyer explains. But the act of making the video public could affect the judge's perception of you. We need to emphasize that your actions were motivated by the necessity of gathering evidence, not mere retaliation. The court proceedings went unexpectedly smoothly. Farrah didn't object or even defend herself. Her attorneys offered a settlement agreement that was extremely favorable to Ellis and seemed eager to end the process as soon as possible. Ellis speculated that she may have hoped to minimize media attention by ending her marriage quickly. However, the social media storm began to affect Ellis' professional life. Initially, a few small clients canceled on the grounds of incompatible values, and then an important concert hall project suspended his contract, fearing the negative attention that working with him would bring. The circle of acoustic engineers is small by nature, and soon Ellis found himself a controversial figure in the industry. One day, his old friend and project partner Martin came into his temporary office with a serious expression. "I need to talk to you," Martin got right to the point. "The board has concerns about continuing to work with you. Media coverage is beginning to affect our image, and parent committees in both school programs have expressed concern." Ellis laughed bitterly. "So now I'm a dangerous person unfit to work with children?" "That's not true," Martin shook his head, "but you know how conservative the industry is. We are dealing with a public place and image is crucial." Eventually, they came to an agreement. Ellis would continue to work as a behind-the-scenes consultant, but would no longer be involved in client meetings and public appearances for a while. It was a crushing blow to his career, but he had no choice. Farrah's situation is far worse than Ellis. The gallery held an emergency meeting the morning after the incident, with all staff and key investors in attendance. After the meeting, Farrah received a formal letter of dismissal, which immediately terminated her contract for misconduct and damaging the reputation of the gallery. The Vance solo exhibition, which she had been carefully preparing for 6 months, was completely canceled, and all other projects she had personally curated were handed over to other curators. "It's not just about ethics," the gallery director explained to a colleague in a private conversation that was later leaked online. "Relationships in the art world are built on trust and professionalism. It is unacceptable for Farrah to cross the line with an artist and confuse a personal relationship with a professional decision. The art world is a tight-knit community and news travels extremely fast." Over the next few days, Farrah's former friends and colleagues unfollowed her on social media. Public invitations to events were withdrawn, and several artists even requested that their work be removed from past exhibitions she had curated, not wanting her name to be associated with them in any way. A week later, Montreal Art Monthly published an article titled Boundaries, the Intersection of Art and Ethics, which, while not directly naming Farrah, was clearly discussing her incident. The article sparked a wide-ranging discussion about professional ethics in the art world, further isolating Farrah. Meanwhile, Farrah's mental state deteriorates dramatically. Since the live streaming incident, she has blocked all her social media accounts and moved to a remote hotel for a temporary stay. According to friends who wish to remain anonymous, she barely eats or drinks and spends her days in despair. Her once proud career collapsed overnight, wiping out the connections and reputation she had built over a decade. Not only did she lose her job, she lost her identity. The friend explains, "In the art world, your reputation is all you have." Now her name has become a joke, a cautionary tale. Vance is in a similarly difficult position, but he has more experience dealing with crises than Farrah. On the day the show was canceled, he issued a carefully worded statement expressing deep regret and needing time to reflect. Several important collectors immediately withdrew their intentions to buy his work, and a New York gallery suspended negotiations with him. However, Vance was quick to take action. He closed all his social media accounts and left Montreal for Europe. A week later, his agent told the press that Vance was turning this experience into artistic nourishment, suggesting that the scandal could be the inspiration for his new work. "Artists are different from ordinary people," his manager said in an interview. "For them, even pain and humiliation are fodder for creativity." Vance will respond to all of this with his new work. This attempt to commercialize a personal scandal has sparked more criticism in the art world, but a few critics have expressed understanding, arguing that it is the artist's instinct to turn life into art. In any case, Vance has at least found a possible way out, albeit a controversial one, compared to Farrah, who had a complete meltdown. A month later, Ellis returned to the apartment they once shared. Farrah has moved out, leaving only a few inconvenient items behind. The empty room felt strange to him, as if it had never held their love and life. He sat on the terrace and watched the sun set, recalling the countless evenings he had spent here with Farrah. The thrill of revenge had long since dissipated, replaced by deep loneliness and confusion. He succeeds in punishing his betrayer, but also loses the direction and meaning of his life. The ringing phone interrupted his thoughts. "It's Farrah's mother. Are you satisfied?" The voice on the other end of the line was filled with anger and pain. "Farrah attempted suicide last night and is now in the hospital. She lost everything: her job, her friends, her reputation. Is that what you want?" Ellis felt a wave of dizziness, and her hand shook slightly as she gripped the phone. He never thought it would come to this. Anger and the urge to retaliate caused him to overlook the potentially serious consequences. I don't know." He struggled to find the right words, but all explanations paled in comparison. "You don't need to know," Farrah's mother said coldly. "You've gotten your revenge. I hope it lets you sleep well." The phone hung up, leaving a silence. Ellis put the phone down, feeling emptier than ever. He looked around at the home that was once filled with love and warmth, but now all that was left were the cold walls and furniture. The price of revenge was far higher than he had ever imagined. 3 months later, the divorce was officially finalized. Ellis acquired ownership of the apartment, but he has decided to sell it. Every corner of this place is filled with memories, both good and painful, that keep him from truly moving forward. His professional life gradually got back on track, but the circle of acoustic engineers was small and the effects of the scandal remained. Some clients politely declined to cooperate. Some friends kept their distance. Ellis begins to think about moving to another city for a fresh start. Farrah moved back into her parents' home after being discharged from the hospital, away from Montreal. According to a mutual friend, she is undergoing psychotherapy in an attempt to rebuild her life, but progress is slow. The art world's rejection of her continues, and her once bright career prospects have dimmed. Vance left Canada and is rumored to be back in Europe. His artistic career suffered a heavy blow, but being a man adept at capitalizing on controversy, he began to try to turn the experience into new artistic endeavors. One night, Ellis receives an anonymous email containing only a link. Clicking on it, he saw a page for an art exhibit, a new work by Vance called Games and Betrayals. The exhibition description states that the works were inspired by an intimate relationship that was publicly shamed. Ellis closed the page and felt a wave of nausea. Even under these circumstances, Vance still tries to profit from the tragedy. He remembered what Farrah had once said, "It's not cheating, it's just a game." Now it seems true for Vance. It's just another form of artistry, and their lives are just fodder. Packing for the move, Ellis discovers a collection of notes in a drawer. Every note he and Farrah have left each other over the past 5 years. He picked up the top one, written by Farrah on their anniversary. 5 years later, I still love you more every day. Forever yours, F. Ellis put the note back in the drawer and closed it gently. He had thought their love was indestructible enough to resist the ravages of time and temptation. However, reality proves that even the deepest love can be destroyed by betrayal, and revenge only brings more pain and emptiness. On her last day, Ellis stood in the middle of her empty apartment, memories flooding back. He remembered the excitement of bringing Farrah home for the first time, the joy of choosing their furniture together, and the countless nights snuggled up on the couch. All these good memories are now tarnished by a game. He picked up his bags and took one last look around before closing the door and leaving the key with the realtor. Stepping out of the building, the winter snow began to fall in Montreal, covering the streets and buildings as if trying to hide all the pain and betrayal that had taken place. After packing up the last box of belongings, Ellis once again looked around the once-loved apartment. The artwork they bought on their honeymoon in Italy still hangs on the walls. The bookshelves are lined with records they collected together, and every utensil in the kitchen carries memories of their life together. These items, once filled with warmth, are now only cold outlines. He picked up the keys and the car keys and left the rest with the realtor. The condo is listed for sale, and while the visibility has attracted a few lowball inquiries from curiosity seekers, serious buyers have been deterred. Eventually, Ellis decided to drop the price by 25% just to get rid of it as soon as possible and cut ties with this past once and for all. As he walks out of the building, he meets Meredith, an elderly woman who lives next door. She had been a loyal friend of theirs, often exchanging art topics with Farrah and baking Ellis his favorite cinnamon rolls. "Are you really leaving?" Meredith asked, disappointment in her voice. Ellis nodded. "Yes, early morning flight tomorrow." "I'm not going to judge what you did," the old woman said softly, "but I think you should know that Farrah came by once after that day to pick up some things that were left behind. She looks not so good." Ellis was silent for a moment. "I heard. How is she now?" "I heard she went back to her parents' house to recuperate." Meredith hesitated. "Ellis, I've known you guys for 5 years. You used to be the most compatible couple I've ever seen. I'm really sorry that this happened." Ellis felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, Meredith." "Me too." They hugged goodbye, and Ellis walked to the parking lot. While putting his luggage in the trunk, he found a CD stuck under the seat. Taking it out, it was a live recording purchased at a jazz club on the day of their first date. He had listened to this CD countless times, and every note held fond memories of when they first met. Driving to the airport, Ellis put the CD in the player. A familiar saxophone melody echoed through the compartment, reminding him of how, 5 years ago, he'd been captivated by Farrah's bright smile and love of music. At that time, they were full of anticipation for the future and believed that love could conquer all. In retrospect, that pure trust seems so precious and so fragile. He would have turned off the music and decided not to dwell on the past. Instead, he found his hand dangling above the button and eventually lowered it. Perhaps he needed to hear the melody in its entirety one last time as a farewell to the past. The music continued to play as Ellis' thoughts drifted to the whole event. Revenge did give him a brief thrill, and seeing Farrah and Vance's shocked and horrified expressions in that moment gave him a twisted sense of satisfaction. But this fulfillment is soon replaced by emptiness, and with it the complete destruction of all three lives. When news of Farrah's suicide attempt arrives, he realizes that his revenge has gone beyond expectations. What he wanted was to expose the truth and make the betrayer face the consequences, but never wanted to push a man to the brink. At that moment, he was no longer an enforcer of justice, but a victimizer in another sense. The lights of the airport appeared ahead, and Ellis gathered his thoughts and prepared to check in. Tomorrow he would fly to Vancouver and start over in that strange city. He had contacted several potential employers, And while responses were few and far between because of the incident, at least one small recording studio had expressed interest. As the plane took off, Ellis looked out the window at the diminishing silhouette of the city of Montreal and remembered what a friend had once told him. When you embark on a path of vengeance, you'd better dig 2 graves first. Now he truly understood the meaning of the words. In destroying his betrayer, he had destroyed the life and love he once had. Betrayal destroys trust, revenge destroys souls. In this game where there are no winners, all participants become victims. This is probably the cruelest irony of all. The betrayal that started in the name of the game eventually became the reality that destroyed everyone. 18 months later, Vancouver. The drizzle hit the cafe windows, creating meandering trails of water. Ellis took a seat in the corner with a steaming cup of black coffee and the day's Vancouver sun in front of her. The cafe became part of his new life, and he came here every Sunday morning, ordering a cup of black coffee, reading the newspaper, and observing the people coming and going. Life in Vancouver was going better than he expected. The first few months were really tough. Someone would always recognize his name when looking for a job and connect it to the incident. But as time passed, the Montreal Marriage Live event was replaced by a new social media sensation and became a thing of the past. Ellis eventually landed a position at a small recording studio where he was responsible for the acoustic design of music production. The job wasn't on the same scale as it was in the Montreal days, but it was enough to restart his career. He flipped to the arts section of the newspaper, and a small story caught his eye. Boundaries and betrayal. Vance Harlow's Berlin solo exhibition sparks controversy. Vance's new exhibition is titled Privacy and Publicity in the Digital Age, and the work is filled with reflections on betrayal and public humiliation. The article reads, critics' reactions to the exhibition have been mixed, with some praising it for its courage to transform personal trauma into art, and others criticizing it for commercializing a private tragedy. Ellis shook his head and put down the paper. Vance eventually finds ways to capitalize on tragedy, as seems to be the nature of the artist. He took out his cell phone and searched for pictures of the exhibit. The screen showed a series of installations, one of which stood out, a bed surrounded by projectors on which photos of broken marriages and social media comments were projected. Even at this distance, Ellis recognizes that there are pictures of his and Farrah's wedding in them. How exploitative, Ellis muttered to himself, a complex emotion flooding through him, not anger, but a weary sense of irony. Vance manages to turn the tragedy of the 3 of them into art and profit, while Ellis and Farrah must suffer real consequences. He signaled to the cafe waiter for another cup of coffee and then continued to browse the paper. In the social news pages, an article on privacy in the digital age mentioned his case, calling it a landmark event in social media public shaming. The article discusses the ethical boundaries of digital surveillance and the potential consequences of publicizing private content, citing several ethicists. These discussions used to infuriate Ellis. How could these people, who had never experienced betrayal, judge his behavior? But today, he felt only a quiet detachment, as if the articles discussed another person's story. A red-headed woman walked into the cafe, and Ellis' eyes couldn't help but follow her. From her back, she bore a passing resemblance to Farrah, the same slender figure, the same elegant demeanor. As the woman turned, Ellis got a good look at her face. It certainly wasn't Farrah, but the brief illusion was enough to make his heart race. It's not the first time. Over the past 18 months, he'd seen Farrah countless times in strangers. A similar haircut on a street corner, a familiar laugh in a restaurant, a woman standing in a similar position in front of a gallery window. Each time, he felt a rush of mixed emotions come over him, somewhere between anticipation and fear. He had loved her deeply. Even after the discovery of the betrayal, the embers of love are still not fully extinguished when it comes to carrying out the plan of revenge. That's probably the most painful part, knowing that you still care about someone who has completely betrayed you. Ellis returned to her apartment and began preparing materials for a new project at the studio. His new apartment was far smaller than the one in Montreal, but it was warmly and comfortably furnished. Several abstract paintings he purchased at the Vancouver secondhand market hang on the walls, replacing the artwork he used to collect with Farrah. He endeavors to create an entirely new space that carries no traces of the past. At 4 p.m., my cell phone vibrated, and the screen showed a text message from an unknown number in Montreal. I'm in Vancouver for an art fair. Can we meet? F. Ellis stared at her cell phone screen and felt her heart race. 18 months pass, and he thinks he's let go, but a simple message from Farrah is enough to shake his peace. He put his phone down and walked over to the window, looking out at the Vancouver city skyline. The rain had stopped and the sun was peeking through the clouds, illuminating the mountains and bays in the distance. Gradually, he builds a new life and finds some measure of peace in this strange and beautiful city. And now the past is trying to break back in. He wondered how Farrah was doing. As far as he could tell, she returned to her parents' home to recuperate after her suicide attempt and later took a low-profile job at a small community arts center in Toronto. Her social media accounts have been closed, with the occasional mutual friend mentioning her, but with very little information. Why does she want to see him? Is it to seek some kind of relief, or revenge, or simply nostalgia? Regardless of the motivation, the meeting could rekindle painful memories and upset the balance he'd worked so hard to establish. Ellis picks up her cell phone and starts typing, then deletes it. He repeats this process a few times before finally taking a deep breath and knocking down a reply. Instead of replying immediately, he put his cell phone back in his pocket and walked out of the cafe. It's a warm spring day in Vancouver, with pedestrians hurrying along the streets, each busy with their own lives. Ellis took a deep breath, taking in the scent of her new life. He knew that whether he chose to meet or refuse, it would be an important decision. Meeting may revive painful memories or provide some kind of relief. Refusing means closing the door on the past completely, but may never truly understand the reasons behind the game. Eventually, Ellis pulled out her cell phone and replied, "I'm sorry, but I don't think we have anything more to say. I wish you all the best at the fair." After sending the message, Ellis felt a strange calm. He is no longer driven by anger and the desire for revenge, nor is he bound by his past love. He learned to accept the painful experience and learn from it, rather than letting it define his future. Walking home, Ellis thought back to where it all started, that phone call he'd overheard. It's not cheating, it's just a game. How ironic that a tragedy that began as a game ended up costing all involved dearly. Farrah loses her career and reputation. Vance's artistic career is devastated, and Ellis herself loses the love and life she once cherished. There are no winners, only lessons. Love is not a game, betrayal is not a game, and revenge is not a game. When we treat our most precious emotions as child's play, it often leads to irreparable tragedy. Ellis walked into the apartment without turning on the lights and stood quietly in front of the window, looking out over Vancouver at night. In this unfamiliar city, he begins a new journey with the scars of the past, but also with hope for the future. Maybe one day he'll be able to truly let go and believe in love again. Maybe never. But in any case, he has come to realize that in the game of love and betrayal, true victory lies not in revenge, but in gaining wisdom from tragedy and then courageously moving on. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.